Well, hello and welcome back to the Not Safe for Sunday School podcast. Today I'm sitting down with my friend Robbie. What's up, Robbie?
Hello. I'm admiring your new monitor, which shows the waveforms.
Oh, thank you.
Let me tell you, I've been podcasting with Matt for several years, not sporadically podcasting with him, and we were pretty scrappy at the beginning.
Yeah.
So things have come a long way.
Yeah, I think we started on your cell phone, just doing an audio
That's right.
message.
standing in the middle of a lake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Robbie and I had a podcast a while back called In the Water, where we talked about the same topic that we're going to talk about today, which is mental health. And it is supposedly Mental Health Awareness Month, which neither Robbie nor I was aware of. I guess that's why we need a month to be aware of it. But
yeah, so I'm the resident expert on all things mental. I'm the neuroscience, psychiatric authority on all this. So good thing that they brought me in.
Yeah. Little did you know that humans are actually just brains inside of bodies. So
yeah,
we all are in some way an expert on what it means to be mental.
Yeah. On a personal level, Matt and I, we have our own mental health struggles, and I think everybody in the world can relate to us. I have an acute illness that I was diagnosed with years before we started In the Water, and then Matt, I guess he can speak to it.
I have a chronic pain condition, and because of that, I also struggle with anxiety and depression very heavily, as well as an adjustment disorder, which affects that. So big life changes and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a really good term for it when we talked on the podcast. It wasn't like a mental disorder. It was
condition.
Mental condition.
That's my preferred terminology, and I'm pretty adamant about that terminology because just to go on my own little spiel, I feel like the term mental illness itself assists in the stigma because it suggests that people with a mental health condition have something wrong with them. And many people who have a mental health condition do think that things are wrong, but mental illnesses can't be cured. Mental health condition is a term which suggests that it's we who have, say, like anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, things like that. We just see the world differently and experience life differently than a mainstream, kind of person. So we see things differently. An anxious person sees things differently, but not in a lesser way. So that's kind of the crux of why I prefer condition, just in my own personal usage.
Yeah, I really love that terminology. Like having a struggle with your mental health or a condition that you're diagnosed with, it doesn't make you less of a person.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a really important thing for us to talk about.
Yeah, because it's like illness is like, it just sounds, it connotes like something that needs to be solved or fixed or cured. But there is no cure for mental illness. If you're here in 2024 or whenever you're listening to this and you didn't know that mental illnesses have no cure, then surprise. But people with mental health issues, they don't get cured. They just find security, victory, and healing.
Yeah, well, why don't we dive into some of these passages? The first two that I want to talk about come from the New Testament. One of them is from Jesus, and one of them is from Paul. And I picked these two passages to talk about first because I think they're most commonly taken out of context, which takes some helpful passages and makes them very unhelpful, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so the first comes from Matthew 6, and the out of context version says, "Do not worry." So if you're worrying, don't. that's the advice from Jesus, right? And the second passage comes from Philippians 4, and it says, "Do not be anxious about anything." So, if you're anxious, don't just don't be anxious. Yeah. And it's something that has been something I've been very passionate about recently has been nuance in the Bible, and especially when it comes to the context of passages. And so when we look at Matthew 6, it does say, "Do not worry," several times, but it would not be fair to take 3 words out of context, because later it says, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all of these things will be given to you as well." Mm-hmm. It's saying don't worry about material things, because yes, they are important. It's not saying do not worry; those things are not important. It's saying don't worry. God acknowledges that they're important, mm-hmm. and God is going to take care of those things. But seek God first, and everything else that you're worried about will also come with it.
Yeah.
And the larger context of that chapter as well is talking specifically about money. Talks about clothes, talks about food. A very, very beneficial passage that even in our home church we talked about a few weeks ago was this concept of not worrying about money from this exact passage. However, when you take it out of context and it's like, oh, you're worried about something unrelated, well, the Bible says not to. Like, wow, thanks. That's not
so helpful.
Right.
At the very least, the instructions are clear.
Right. Thanks. So something must be wrong with me because I am worrying, and Jesus says not to.
Yeah.
And then the second passage, the Philippians passage, don't be anxious about anything. It goes on to say, but present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds. It's not don't be anxious, like just because you shouldn't be anxious, because God wants you to have peace. It's turn to God when you're anxious. It's not saying anxiety, like you're sinning because you have anxiety, right? It's saying, yeah, anxiety is a part of life. And when you are feeling anxious, turn to God. And it's not going to make sense. It's not going to solve your problem. But you will have the peace of God that will guard your heart and your mind. You'll be able to push through, and you'll be able to traverse is the word that I'm going to go with. You'll be able to traverse the things that are making you anxious. It's not that your anxiety will just magically disappear. You will have peace that doesn't make sense because God is on your side. Mm-hmm. But again, the out of context advice is just, stop being anxious. Mm-hmm. Just stop it.
Yeah. For me, the benefit of the out of context statement, do not worry or do not be anxious about anything, is that when it's used in a gentle, understanding fashion, mm-hmm. it's a consistent reminder. Mm-hmm. We humans are so super forgetful. Mm-hmm. I forget what happened to me this morning or yesterday. Mm-hmm. So the Bible has like thousands of verses, and not all of them can be memorized. Mm-hmm. But reducing the idea of do not worry into 3 words and saying that gently to people, I think it serves the same function that when God was speaking to the Israelites, this was, I think, before they were even a nation, mm-hmm. but when he was speaking to his people in the book of Joshua, he tells them on something like 13 different occasions, be strong and courageous. Mm-hmm. Do not be terrified. Yeah. That's like the most common concept mm-hmm. repeated in Joshua. Mm-hmm. And there was a time in my life where I was like, that's so dismissive. God, why don't you tell them like strategies or battle tactics or things like that?
Right.
But then I really opened my eyes when I realized that God was just reminding Joshua and the people of a truth. And it's the same exact truth that Matthew and Philippians are trying to convey. It's what you're saying, like a consistent reminder to the people of our age right now that we don't need to worry. And there's no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no like substantial reason to be anxious. And you know, the condition of anxiety is marked as, I think like its textbook definition is an unreasonable amount of worrying. So in the definition right there, it just tells you that anything that's unreasonable to worry about, in the eyes of science, it's unnecessary, and in the eyes of Scripture, it's unnecessary as well, because God has our back.
Yeah, it's just that nuance piece where it's like you can say be strong and courageous. You can say do not worry. You can say do not be anxious. What's important in your relationship with whoever you're saying that to is that both you and they understand why, like the because behind it. And so it's like when Jesus and Paul are talking in these passages, it's do not worry because, do not be anxious because, and it's not oh man, I'm so sorry to hear that you're anxious. You know, God says not to. Which is like, if you're someone who struggles with anxiety, I know that I would not benefit from hearing that when I'm feeling anxious. But if someone says, hey, remember that passage from Philippians about not being anxious, God has you covered, and God is going to take care of you. Right. It's that very critical context that I think the nuance of it gets lost if we take it out of context. Even if, like, I can repeat that to myself, and I know, okay, I don't be anxious, and I can repeat that to myself, and it's comforting to me because I know the why behind it. And I think more Christians would benefit from knowing the why of the passage, so that it can become this thing where, like God is saying to the Israelites, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. And the passage that comes to mind is Joshua 1:9, where he says, be strong and courageous, do not be terrified, do not be discouraged, because the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And so it's not just saying, don't be terrified. That's irrational.
You have something wrong with you if you're terrified.
Right. Or I've even heard like, oh, if you're anxious or you're worrying, then that's a sin, because you're making your anxiety an idol that's more powerful than God. Like, no, man, like life is just hard sometimes. And I'm anxious. Like, and it's that because piece, like, don't be terrified because God is with you. That's the comforting part, right? The be strong and courageous, the do not worry, the don't be anxious. Like, that's the reminder. And that's how like people in ancient Israel, that's how they spoke. Like, because the Bible wasn't written down for a lot of its history, what would happen is they would pass it down through oral tradition, and they would remind each other. Like, there was no chapters or verse numbers. They would start by saying just the beginning of a passage, and that's how they would reference it. And so they would say, oh yeah, do not worry. And their mind would automatically fill in the gaps with the rest of the passage.
Yeah.
Because they had it memorized. That's how it was passed down. Or they would say, don't be anxious. And then it would fill in the rest of the passage.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not applicable for the New Testament passages, but for the Old Testament ones, that's how they reference Scripture.
Yeah. This is really deep stuff.
Yeah.
This is really good. It's kind of like how you talk about the title of a song if you want to reference like the lyrics of the song. Like, like Viva La Vida. I could say that. I could just name drop it, and we already know like what the mood of the song is. Right. So
it's like those videos where someone plays a G chord, and then just suddenly every emo is transported back to the Black Parade, and the entire song just fills in their memory. Yeah. And so those passages in context are very helpful and very applicable. Out of context, not so much, because you kind of need to understand it for it to be helpful a little bit. But I wanted to take a look at a couple of passages in the Old Testament, some people in the Bible who struggled with their mental health, because I feel like it's one thing to say, oh, well, Jesus says do not worry, and Paul says don't be anxious, but where in the Bible do we actually see these struggles? Because I feel like the best thing that I can have as a person who struggles with my mental health is someone to walk alongside me and to understand what it's like to go through it. And so I think sometimes because we like to name drop these little flavor passages and sprinkle in a little bit of Jesus and then walk away, like we don't really get the understanding of what the Bible is trying to say or what it's trying to portray, and instead we boil the Bible down to a set of rules, which is not what it's aiming to do. It's aiming to tell the story of people who are broken and hurting, and how God is healing and making things whole. And so the first passage that I want to look at is Psalm 23. And this is a psalm that is written by David, who spends a good chunk of his life on the run of people trying to kill him. I believe his father-in-law, Saul, was the first king of Israel. And Saul tried to kill him because David was becoming more popular than he was. And then eventually David's son ends up trying to kill him and trying to take the throne from David. And so David spends a lot of time on the run, life or death situations, a lot of caves that he lives in. He writes a lot of psalms, and these psalms aren't like huge theological pieces, but they're filled with emotion and wrestling and struggle. And so David is a great example in these psalms of what it looks like to wrestle with your circumstances and ultimately turn to God in them. And so Psalm 23 goes like this. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I really like the second verse where it says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. I feel like sometimes if we don't take rest for ourselves, like our body will rest for us. And I even had a day like that recently where I just felt like my body shut down and my mind shut down. And the first half of the day was really rough. The second half of the day, I was like, wow, I feel rested. I feel like my mind is more clear. I feel like my body is stronger.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
And I can relate to what David is talking about in this passage.
I really love this passage. It's probably my favorite psalm, which is, I know, completely original. There's something about it that is just so comforting in the face of struggle. Every single verse in it is a banger, honestly. And God being a shepherd for the first, like, just going off of the first verse alone. Mm-hmm. David was a shepherd himself when he was young. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he's talking about God as his own shepherd is kind of like a father talking about God as his own father, or the president of the United States referring to God as his own leader, his own president. Mm-hmm. It's just such a admission of utmost trust and utmost confidence that God has all of our struggles and all of our fears covered. Some translations of verse 4 talk about the valley of the shadow of death. And there must be some reason that our versions aren't talking about it here. I like the phrasing of, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, or fear no danger. I can think of things that are worse than darkest valleys, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But I can't think of much worse than the valley of the shadow of death, mm-hmm. because not only is it death, which is final, but it's the shadow of death, which is darkness, and the valley of the shadow of death, which is impossible to escape from. Mm-hmm. So verse 4 comforts me because in the middle of the worst thing that is or isn't imaginable, God allows us to fear no danger or fear no evil. Mm-hmm. And that's comforting to a lot of us who deal with mental health issues, because oftentimes we are surprised when something mentally related happens to us. God isn't surprised. But yeah, just to sum it up, like, David is such a comforting character in Scripture to me, mm-hmm. Because of the contrast, I guess you can call it the irony, in how much hope he had and how much his heart was for the Lord despite the situation and the bad experience that he was having. Mm-hmm.
I want to move forward to 1 Kings 19, which is where we get the story of Elijah, or a story of Elijah, because there is many. But in 1 Kings 18, essentially what's going on here is there's this King Ahab who is married to this woman Jezebel, and Israel is kind of spiraling out of control. There's a lot of worship of false gods, and Elijah is one of the faithful few who's trying to alert the powers that be that, hey, we are drifting farther and farther away from God. And it gets to the point where Elijah has this confrontation with hundreds of worshipers of this false god named Baal. It's Baal. Sometimes there's a hyphen in the middle there.
This false god named basketball.
right. And he has this really intense showdown. This is one of my favorite passages of Scripture. Essentially, to sum it up, Elijah has this showdown where he's like, I am the last standing prophet of the one true God. And there are hundreds of false idol worshiping prophets that he's facing, and they arrange this contest to see whose God can call down fire from heaven. And these hundreds of prophets are praying to God, and they're cutting themselves and doing all these crazy things to try to get the attention of this false god. And Elijah even mocks them and is like, where is your God?
Yeah.
Is he busy? Is he sleeping? Is he on the toilet?
Yeah.
Like, is he unavailable right now? And so then he and his small group of followers, they set up an altar to God, and they dump pitchers full of water onto their pile of firewood. just to up the ante for no reason. And he sits down and says a simple prayer, and God calls down fire from heaven, and it completely eviscerates everything. The wood, the stone, the water, like the entire thing is gone. And then he goes on, and we pick up in this passage, 1 Kings 19, 1-8. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and now he had killed all of the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that one of them." Jezebel is threatening Elijah's life. Now keep in mind, Elijah just prayed to God, who called down fire from heaven, and then defeated hundreds of false prophets. We pick up in verse 3. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life at the threat of one woman. Granted, an important woman, right? But going from a high to a very low here. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. My question is, what the heck was in that bread? I see in this passage that Elijah isolates himself. Like he leaves the people that he's with. He goes a day's journey into the wilderness, and that's where God meets him in his isolation to provide him with these things. And I'm sure in hindsight, Elisha was very grateful, but he probably didn't even realize what was going on. That's speculation at this point, but I know that when I'm going through a bout of depression, sometimes just things don't make sense. The world around me is confusing, isolating, and disorienting. And so it's notable that God shows up and expresses his love to Elijah in these ways when Elijah is trying to isolate himself. Which is like, I think sometimes the instinct when we're feeling depressed is to isolate ourselves. And it's also the worst thing for us is to isolate ourselves.
Yeah. I've had friends who have tried isolating themselves to little success, quote unquote success, because inevitably the friends of that person chase them down if they're real friends, if they're godly friends. They it's like the song "Reckless Love," love which chases us down, fights until we're found, leaves the 99 sheep in order to seek us. It's love which I've witnessed in so many friends of mine, and I've been amazed to see a small community coming around individuals who have mental health crises or depression, and just pour out their utmost compassion on that one person. Scriptures say that we are to bear each other's burdens, and in no way or in no instance are we supposed to isolate ourselves and treat our burdens as completely solo, but instead we're supposed to share them among other people.
Yeah, I want to continue with one final passage for us today, and that comes from Jonah 2. If you don't know the story of Jonah, Jonah is kind of a self-righteous dude, and God says, "Hey, I want you to go tell people about me, and I want you to go to this city over here." And Jonah says, "Well, I don't like those people, so I'm not doing that." And so he gets on a boat and goes in the other direction, and then there's a big storm, and Jonah gets thrown into the ocean and swallowed by a very large fish. And some people are very particular about the fact that this is definitely not a whale. It is a very large fish. I don't know. I don't even know if Jonah was an actual real live person or not, or if this was a made up story because of just weird historical inconsistencies and things like that.
Yeah.
But also, historical accuracy was not something that was super important to biblical authors.
I think it was a fish, because if it were a whale, he would have met Pinocchio.
Oh, that's true.
It, so
that's true.
So continuity reasons.
Right. Because we know the Bible and all Disney movies take place in the same universe.
Yeah. The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Takes place in the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and they sing a song about God in it. So
yeah, they're Catholic in that movie, right? Is that...
Yeah. Yeah, so there you go. The Bible is a Disney movie.
We pick up, this is Jonah 2, 1-7. From inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God. He said, "In my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me, the deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you in your holy temple." And this is the part where I want to give a disclaimer that just because a human says something in the Bible doesn't necessarily make it true.
What?
So yes, you could look at from the perspective of God sending a storm so that Jonah ends up in the belly of a fish, so that he would then ultimately go to Nineveh and share about God. Mm-hmm. However, a lot of times in the Bible, God gets blamed for circumstances that humans have brought on themselves. Jonah would not have been in this circumstance if he had just done what God was calling him to do. Mm-hmm. Instead, he decided to go the opposite way, got caught in a storm, and got eaten by a big fish. And so you can look at it from either perspective, but as a disclaimer, just because Jonah says, God, you did this to me, doesn't necessarily mean that God did this to Jonah. God does, however, frequently work through our circumstances, ultimately for good. Hopefully that sets us up a little bit for what we're talking about here. Jonah, obviously, in a pretty fishy situation.
How do I follow that up? With a little ba-dumps. I'm reminded of the scene from Frozen 2, another Disney movie, of which the Bible is one. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The scene in Frozen 2 where Anna is in a really, 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 really depressing and difficult position because of like what's going on with her loved ones. And she sings a song which is not the most like bombastic song. It's not like Let It Go. It's not like Into the Unknown. But it's a simple, like, humble song about choosing to move forward despite how difficult things are. And the difficult situation persists before, during, and after you move. But Anna just chooses to move forward and take a step. I think the song is called "Do the Next Right Thing," and she's kind of limiting her scope to doing the next right step, and then after that, taking another step. So I'm reminded of that here because Jonah is not really improving in his situation, and he can't improve much while he's in the belly of a fish. So what he does do, however, is verse 4. I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look once more toward your holy temple. And then verse 7. As my life was fading away, I remembered the Lord. My prayer came to you, to your holy temple. I just feel like there's such a direct comparison between what Anna was doing and what Jonah is doing here, in the sense that Jonah is making a choice to do the next thing, and the next thing in his situation was just to look at God's temple and pray to him. This entire passage, if it wasn't clear from the beginning, is a prayer to God. There have been times in my life where I have been at my lowest lows, and one of those situations was when I was so deep in a mental health crisis, my faith was even shook to its core. Like I was even wondering if I was still a Christ follower. I made a choice to do one thing, and that one thing was to believe in God even when I didn't believe in him, which sounds like a contradiction, and it was in many ways. But to put it another way, my choice was to believe that I was still worth loving, even though I didn't feel like I was. And isn't that like one of the most poignant things that someone dealing with a mental health crisis can do? Is to accept that they're worth it. Accept that they're worth loving, even when their heart and their mind are telling them, no, you're worthless. It was really hard to make that choice, to believe that I was worth loving. But from that point until now, it's gotten just easier and easier and easier and easier. So for whatever that's worth, I want to tell whoever's listening to this now that things don't have to keep getting worse. Things can start to be getting slowly better, as long as you do what Jonah did and what Anna did, and decide in your struggle, in your deep pit, to do the next right thing and to look at God's holy temple, pray to him, and accept his love. Yeah, that's my little credo, is that God is worth it. He's worth living for. And on a practical level, he can relate to every mental condition that exists now and in the past and in the future. Jesus being fully God and fully human, so he experienced. And he was tempted in every way, but was without sin, like it says in Hebrews. It's my prayer, and it's Matt's prayer, that all you listeners will cling closer to Jesus and to God, knowing that they have your mental health issues at heart, and that they can relate to you, and that they love you.